So, we've all heard the legendary story of Tulip Mania, right? That crazy 17th century Dutch flower frenzy that's basically always held up as history's very first totally spectacular financial bubble. But what if I told you the story we all know is, well, almost entirely fiction? In this explainer, we're diving deep into the actual archival truth behind this famous bubble. We're going to find out why an entire nation decided to literally invent a dramatic, over-the-top myth about their own financial ruin. For literal centuries, historians like Charles Mackay have spun this absolutely wild, almost unbelievable tale. They claim that nobles, citizens, farmers, even chimney sweeps were all throwing their money at flowers. The narrative we've been fed paints this picture of a whole society just completely losing its mind over tulip bulbs. We're talking wealthy nobles, regular folks, and supposedly even poor maids ditching their daily grind to become overnight flower day traders. It's pitched as a society totally consumed by speculative greed. And because this story spread like wildfire, you've probably heard some of the legendary, honestly hilarious anecdotes that came out of it. Like my personal favorite, the story of an unsuspecting visiting sailor. The guy is left alone in a wealthy merchant's house, spots what he thinks is just a regular onion, and, naturally, he boils it up and eats it. Totally unaware his little midday snack was actually a priceless tulip bulb worth 3,000 florins. It's a great story, right? It perfectly captures the supposed absolute absurdity of the era. But let's take a step back and really dive into this. Did a 17th century flower craze actually destroy the Dutch economy? The legend tells us that when the bubble inevitably popped, it triggered a nationwide economic apocalypse, bankrupting everyday citizens and crushing the state's financial foundations. But when modern historians actually went back and dug into the municipal archives, the court records, the original merchant contracts, the truth they uncovered was absolutely shocking. Okay, get ready for the massive plot twist. The archival research proves the exact opposite of the popular myth. Seriously, there were no chimney sweeps or weavers gambling away their life savings. The tulip trade was almost entirely restricted to wealthy burghers, local regents, and highly prosperous merchants. These are folks who already had massive piles of money to burn. Playing the tulip market wasn't some desperate gamble for survival. Honestly, it was just a luxury hobby for the ultra-elite. So that brings us to part one, the economic reality, and the Dutch Golden Age boom. To really wrap our heads around what was happening with these wealthy traders, we have to look at the incredibly prosperous reality of the early 1600s. The Dutch Republic was booming like nowhere else on Earth. Driven by exploding international trade, with their massive merchant fleets dominating global luxury goods, the country saw unprecedented per capita wealth. This created this highly literate, incredibly wealthy middle class. Get this, a staggering 50% of the population owned enough property to actually be taxed. With all that disposable income flying around, a vibrant new consumer culture exploded, which perfectly set the stage for exotic luxury goods to become the ultimate status symbols. And that brings us to the Semper Augustus. Just look at this thing. It was the absolute pinnacle of luxury tulips. Notice that stunning flame-like pattern of red striking through the white? Well, here's the crazy part. What those 17th century traders didn't know is that this beautiful broken pattern was actually caused by a rare mosaic virus. Yeah, a virus. It weakened the bulb, making it incredibly difficult to reproduce, which meant it was exceedingly rare. And to wealthy Dutch collectors, rarity meant prestige. That virus literally drove the demand for these specific, beautiful, infected flowers straight into the stratosphere. You can really see the actual economics of the time captured in the data. If you track the bulb prices, there is a very clear, dramatic spike right between 1634 and early 1637. But, and this is a huge but, it is absolutely crucial to understand that this was a tightly confined, highly speculative market among a very specific clique of rich individuals. Was it a bubble? For sure, yes. But it was a bubble in a hyper-niche luxury asset. It was emphatically not a nationwide madness infecting the working class. Right, so we have to address the elephant in the room, the most famous claim of all. The idea that average people were literally trading entire houses for single tulip bulbs. Well, it turns out this myth stems from one massive outlier. In February 1637, at a very specific orphan estate auction in Alkmaar for the children of a deceased guy named Wouter Bartholomeus Winkel, a couple of extremely rare bulbs did sell for around 5,000 guilders. And yes, that was roughly the price of a modest house back then. But that was a highly unusual one-time auction event. It was entirely detached from everyday reality.
Which leads us to part 2, when the bubble burst in February 1637.
Now, the market did eventually crash, but instead of mass suicides and totally ruined families, it basically just resulted in a highly annoying wave of petty contract disputes. Take a look at this actual Kupsadul, or IOU contract, from the period. It shows exactly what went down. When the prices plummeted, buyers just looked at these pieces of paper and flat out refused to pay the insane prices they had promised just a few weeks earlier. This left sellers incredibly frustrated and ended up completely clogging up the local courts. So the courts are sitting there totally overwhelmed by all these wealthy merchants bickering over flour debts. To fix it, the local commission stepped in with a really clever legal compromise called Rao Cope, which ironically translates to morning price. Under this new ruling, a buyer could completely cancel their inflated tulip contract just by paying a penalty fee of 3.5% of the original price. That's it, 3.5%. The buyers walked away essentially debt-free, the sellers got a tiny fraction of something rather than nothing, and at the end of the day, practically no one actually went bankrupt. Think about what that means. The utter financial devastation we always hear about, it was effectively non-existent. There is practically zero archival record of anyone going bankrupt directly because of tulips. During the 1630s, the broader Dutch economy was still incredibly robust, held up by their vast global trade and manufacturing. The crash of this one highly niche luxury good was practically invisible on a national scale. The country's actual wealth was completely unharmed. All of this brings us to part 3, creating the false narrative and inventing the myth. This leaves us with a fascinating historical mystery. If practically nobody went bankrupt and the national economy was totally fine, why on earth did an entire country invent a dramatic myth of absolute ruin? Well, the answer lies in early modern propaganda, specifically in contemporary artworks like Flora's Chariot of Fools. These images, which were first painted and then mass-produced as engravings, spread like wildfire through the incredibly active Dutch printing press. You gotta remember, this was a highly literate society with hundreds of active printing presses. It was the absolute perfect environment for an idea, or a myth, to go viral.
Now, what's absolutely crucial to realize is that these artworks were definitely not historical records. They were moralizing political cartoons. Just look at the personifications of sin riding along in the wagon. You've got Lekkebaard representing gluttony, just chugging wine. Greyreich represents avarice, greedily clutching a bag of money. And Dame Vain Hope is watching as a bird of hope literally flies away. And trailing behind them, a crowd of weavers, which completely invented the myth that the working class abandoned their jobs, all marching blindly straight into the sea. And this messaging went way beyond just visual art. Satirical pamphlets leaned heavily into deep-seated religious anxieties. See, the Dutch were a very pious, hardworking Protestant society, and they were suddenly grappling with this massive, unprecedented influx of wealth. Pamphleteers capitalized on that anxiety, explicitly comparing the tulip traders to the Israelites in the Book of Exodus, worshiping the golden calf. They framed the flower trade not just as a bad financial investment, but as a deeply sinful, dangerous departure from rational, honest labor and devotion to God. We even see this popping up in the pop culture of the time, like in this satirical song excerpt. Great is Flora, the flower goddess. Flora falls with greater haste. The entire goal of these pamphlets, the engravings, the catchy satirical songs, it was to publicly shame the tulip traders. The broader Dutch society, the quote-unquote wise and moral citizens, wanted to firmly distance themselves from what they saw as an embarrassing, gluttonous display of greed by a few foolish individuals. So they exaggerated the crash to teach a heavy-handed moral lesson. So why does all this actually matter today? The ultimate takeaway from this explainer is that Tulip Mania was literally never a real financial crisis. The enduring myth of a ruined nation was a self-imposed cultural warning against flying too close to the sun. The 17th century Dutch were just deeply, deeply anxious about their own rapid wealth, the rise of a brand new consumerism, and the potential loss of their traditional hardworking values. Which leaves us with a really fascinating final thought to ponder. If the foundational story of the world's very first greedy economic bubble was actually just a moral fable driven by social fear, how much of our modern financial news, our panic over cryptocurrencies or the latest stock market trends, is actually driven by those exact same cultural anxieties today? Honestly, it really makes you look at the headlines a little bit differently, doesn't it?